Welcome from the deep. I am Mike the Finder.
And I am Book of Brett.
And today we are talking about the 2022 film Spiderhead. That is, I believe, a Netflix original. Is that right?
I think so. Yes. And I don't. Is it 2022 or 21? It is 22.
IMDb says 2022. Right. Yeah. So this,
right.
I think,
it just came out.
Yeah, this came out within the last week of whenever we're recording this. So this is a brand new release, which we haven't done in a while. And I think it's time we get back to doing some of those. As somebody we both know recently told us, do you guys have anything new? And, you know, that
we do. It's just backlogged.
Right. That got us thinking, we can't keep doing only movies from last year and the 1970s.
It's what I want to watch. It's not what you want to watch. It's what I want to watch.
Oddly enough, a lot of it is that. So anyway, today we are going to be talking about Spider Baby. And as always, do you want to go ahead and give us a quick synopsis of this movie?
Yeah, this was actually, I thought this was a pretty cool premise. It's basically about these inmates that have been transferred to this like rehab or research penitentiary where they're trying out drugs on the inmates, testing the results. And then, of course, as you would imagine, things go off the rails a little bit.
Yeah, and
a lot of it.
Just to follow that up with the sentence, in this case, extremely long 2-sentence paragraph, IMDb synopsis. In the near future, convicts are offered the chance to volunteer as medical subjects to shorten their sentence. One such subject for a new drug capable of generating feelings of love begins questioning the reality of his emotions. You're right. That is a very, very unnecessarily lengthy and poorly written sentence.
Yes.
Okay, so as we can see here, Spiderhead from 2022, it's an hour 46. The IMDb rating is 5.4, which is much lower than I expected IMDb to be.
It was actually the only thing I saw before I went into this, because as we've talked about before, we try and go into these dry. And I looked up something. I can't remember what it was, but
dry is a really weird way to say that.
Do what?
Going in dry is a really weird way to say that.
Yeah, you know, just going in dry.
Just going in dry.
Going in dry. So I noticed the rating on there. So I was a little. I had my apprehensions going into this one.
Yeah, the only thing I knew about this going into it is a single scene that I saw when this was being advertised to me on Instagram, and it's the scene where where both Steve and Jeff are sitting in the control room or whatever, and it's about the thing that Chris Hemsworth says about millennials. That's the only thing I had seen on this movie.
Of course they advertised that on the advertisement they went with on Instagram.
So for me, I got kind of, for lack of a better term, douche chills whenever I saw that. And it didn't really make me want to watch this, but when we started looking around for stuff that had released recently, this seemed like kind of a good one, because neither one of us. Go ahead.
Let's be frank. What happened was I sent you an article, and it listed new streaming movies, and this was the only one on there that looked bearable at all.
Yeah, most of the others were documentaries and some other weird
or whatever new Jennifer Lopez bastardization was out there.
Yeah,
I don't know what it was, but
it's reality TV stuff and documentaries.
Is
mostly.
That what that is? Okay.
Yeah, it's like a reality docu-series thing, I think. Either way. Spiderhead was one of the few that released this week that actually looks interesting, and as you can see up here, it actually says this is number 6 on popularity on IMDb at the moment, so that's pretty interesting. But let's start out with just our overall thoughts on this movie, and then we'll get into specifics, and then we'll talk ratings. Okay.
So I enjoyed Spiderhead. I thought it was a really cool premise. I actually really liked the premise of this, but I gotta say, it felt very middle of the road. If for lack of a better phrase, like there's a few interesting moments, there's a few really intense moments, but overall, I felt like I was just kind of coasting through this one. There was nothing that stood out that I thought was like terrible or anything like that. But maybe it was just me, but I feel like it never like fully sucked me in and immersed me. Like there were moments I cared about. There were characters I cared about, but for the most part, I felt like I was just kind of riding this one along.
Yeah. My thoughts are mostly that I was kind of into the premise. Like you said earlier, this is actually a pretty cool premise.
Yeah, it is.
And even
It's got almost a sci-fi aspect to it.
Yeah, and it feels very futuristic. Although I don't know if maybe I just missed when they said it was in the future.
I think it's more of an implication.
Right.
I think it's more implied.
This does say in the IMDb thing in the near future. But it does feel very near futuristic, and you're right, it is sort of implied.
A lot of that I think comes from the architecture.
Yeah.
The
technology.
The technology being used at the facility, the architecture, the layout, the product, the production design in this I actually thought was really, really good.
Yeah.
But they did a good job of making it feel futuristic, and that's why I think it says near future, because we don't get like high fantasy futuristic. Like none of the food is in pill form. Nobody's running around with like the neon rings that like Futurama makes fun of. Like you don't get like high fantasy, hyper futuristic, but there is definitely the vibe of this could be, you know, rather than 200 years in the future, maybe like 20 to 30 years in the future.
Yeah, I think overall, though, my thoughts about this are kind of like, I'm in, because the premise is cool.
Yeah.
But the further we get into it, specifically the last act, really turned me off, and it felt almost like... It felt almost like a different ending to a movie that I hadn't been watching. Like, it turns such a hard corner for me in terms of tone that it feels really weird, because throughout the whole thing, it's got this really ominous vibe. And then it turns almost over the top, kind of, with the ending and the twist and like all of the stuff. It just turns this hard left corner that just kind of turned me off from the whole thing. And I think I probably would have liked this better if the tone of the ominous, unknown weirdness that's going on pays off, whereas like I feel like they're building up this thing that they can't necessarily live up to in the ending, and they almost didn't know how to end it.
Well, yeah,
we're gonna be talking about spoilers here, so fair warning.
Yeah. I guess I agree and I disagree. The ending for me was more, not completely unbelievable, but I think it was less realistic than they thought it was. Although I will say I think there's actually a good build up to everything that does happen.
Absolutely. The build up to it is phenomenal, which is I think is why the ending for me is such a letdown. Yeah,
no, but at the same time, I don't know how else you do end a movie like this. And I feel like this is something we've said before, where it's not that we could have done it better. It's that I don't know how else you end it, but there's just something I can't put my finger on that stands out. At least that's what I think you're saying. My issue with the ending, and we don't have to jump too far ahead, and I won't go into details what my issue was yet. My issue is that it just isn't hyper believable, but when we get later on into the episode, I'll kind of get into why I found it a little unrealistic at the ending.
Yeah. Okay, well let's start going into some specifics here.
Okay.
I will say the first 10 seconds into this movie, I was like, I'm on board, because it feels like the cinematography is actually serving the purpose of what they're trying to do. The drone shots at the beginning,
of it's really good.
It is. The drone shots at the beginning immediately told me that whoever the cinematographer was, they know how to use drone shots and not just, hey, I want to use a drone. It's got its purpose. It shows you the location really well. It shows you how they are getting in and out, which pays off at the end. It's flying with the plane or the helicopter, whatever it is there at the beginning. Mm-hmm. They're using the drone the way it's supposed to be used in terms of telling the story already so close in at the beginning here.
Rather than we had the budget for an Inspire 2 or whatever the they use.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, the cinematography uses shallow depth of field so much in this movie that it drove me crazy. But I think a lot of that is this movie is also really dark. And there's not a lot of light going on in most of this movie, other than when they're in the container that they're being like watched.
So the whole shallow depth of field thing, I feel like is one of two things, and I don't feel like it's usually one of two things, and I don't feel like it's one of those things in this. A lot of time, not a lot of times, but sometimes you'll get like a shallow depth of field because it allows for more light, and so you'll see that in a lot of like low budget productions.
Right.
It's a really, really good way to get around that. The other way I feel like they used it in this is more of shallow depth of field is like a total trend. Just like the orange teal thing has been a trend for a long, long time. The shallow depth of field is a cinematography trend that we're seeing a lot now. Because if you watch a lot of like older movies, and not even like old movies, but you watch like older movies, you watch like
anything
a lot of
past
epic
the
films.
last 10 years is
They were going a little bit. They were giving you a little bit more in the terms of depth of field. Simply because they wanted to show more of everything, and I think it actually serves its purpose in this. It's used a lot. I'm not saying it's not used a lot.
It is.
But I feel like in this, it does a really, really good job of showing isolation in the characters.
So I would totally agree with you if it wasn't also used in every other shot. If they were to pick and choose where they were using it a little bit more, I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to get on a whole 20-minute tangent here because most people I don't think care about stuff like this. I did just want to mention that where it did. There's a lot of depth of field, but you're right. It's like I said earlier. This is a very dark movie, and the locations are very dark. And so, in order to shoot in dark situations like that, like you said, you need to have a very shallow depth of field. So,
or a lot of contrast between your blacks and your highlights.
Yeah, control your lighting a little bit better as well.
Right.
So this is also the one thing we haven't touched on is this is based on a short story, which is kind of weird. It's always sort of strange to me how you can take a short story and turn it into a full movie, and maybe
Liberties.
Maybe that's why the ending feels so weird, and the premise is so good, and the build up to the end is so good that I haven't read the short story, but it just feels like maybe it's sort of the same problem with Old, where it's based off this thing. In Old's case, I think it's a graphic novel, but you have to take liberties in order to change it to fit the format that you're shooting, especially if you're going to make it an almost 2-hour-long movie from a short film.
And in the case of one, how would M. Night Shyamalan have stuck his mug into that movie if he didn't have the ending we had?
So I want to talk about let's talk about Steve, because Steve is an interesting character in this.
This is the part I really wanted to talk about. Because
Steve is Chris Hemsworth, just to be clear.
I did not take a lot of notes for this movie, just because as we were going along, I didn't find a lot to like really nitpick at. Chris Hemsworth is such a likable asshole, or a charming asshole in this movie.
He is.
First of all, he's really, really good at being charming, but being able to tell that there's something sneaky about him.
Yeah.
And the end of this movie, watching him just switch in between emotions, the way he switches in between emotions at the end of this movie, where he's under this like drug cocktail that he can't control. He does such a good job at the end. I mean, he's really good throughout it, but it really actually stuck out to me at the end when he's just running the gamut of these emotions, and he's doing it believably. Like, it looks like he's going through these emotions, but he's got no control over it. And when you look at it from an acting perspective, that this is a man who is sober of mind, but is able to actually get himself to portray all all of this back to back, switching back and forth. It was that was really impressive to me. I gotta say that.
I agree with you, and I think part of what sells that is, again, some of the cinematography here is used in such a good way, and they use colors and depth of field in order to really show you kind of what they're feeling. And one of my favorite moments in this is toward the beginning when Jeff, when Steve takes Jeff out to that island, and Jeff is standing there looking at it like this place is beautiful, and then they turn the camera around behind them and it's this factory. There are moments like that where it's like Steve does such a good job, like you were saying. Chris Hemsworth does such a good job of playing this nice guy, but you can just tell the entire movie, you can just tell, even at the beginning, there's something off about him. And he does such a good job at hiding it. And then at the end, I totally agree, man. The ending is, while over the top, he does an amazing job at selling the moment that he's in that plane. All of his stuff is leaking. All the chemicals are leaking into his back and stuff. And he's just going through these huge range of emotions. Yeah, it's really incredible.
Yeah. It was really cool to see him deliver like that, because my only experience with Chris Hemsworth is Thor.
Me too.
The one Thor movie I've seen. And so I was like,
he's also in Cabin in the Woods, right? That's him, or is that his brother?
I think that's his brother.
Is it?
Maybe.
Now I need to
look
know.
that up.
Yeah, hang on.
But either way, man, like, it was just like having Thor as a reference.
It is Chris Hemsworth.
It is. Okay. Having that as a reference made me, on one side I was reluctant, because I was like, okay, he's mostly doing Marvel movies, but then you look at the people who are in Marvel movies, and so many of them are amazing actors that it's kind of like you can't really hold that against them. Like Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr. is like one of my all-time favorite actors, and he's Iron Man, so it's kind of like you have to kind of, sit there and go, okay, yeah, he was in this, but like, let's see them branch out. And so it was cool to see him branch away from that, and then not only do that, but do it so well.
Yeah, I completely agree. Jeff is also, I've seen him somewhere, and I couldn't.
Yeah, I have too.
I couldn't put my finger on it. And then I looked up who the director for this movie was. Let me flip over here. Joseph Kosinski. And he's the director of Tron Legacy. He also did the new Top Gun. And Jeff is in the new Top Gun. So that is where I have seen him before. And so I was kind of on the fence about him for the first little bit. And I even think maybe his little monologue toward the end, where he's got his girlfriend in the unit and he's trapped
the
Steve
narration
with the it's. Well, no, not the narration, but he's got a little monologue where he's like, I'm going to make sure you're never going to do this to anybody else. It's a little over the top and not fantastic, but otherwise he's really good too. And it feels like, because I don't know him nearly as well, or he's not as known as, Chris Hemsworth is, I feel like the reason this is sort of believable, because for me, it's sort of hard to take Chris Hemsworth as hardcore intellectual, but Jeff is more unknown, and he plays off of Steve so well that I think it helps sell everything a little bit more for me.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely something to be said about watching a movie that has people in it that you're not familiar with. It's why Walt Disney, and not that it was like ethical, but it's why Walt Disney trapped the lady who voiced Snow White into that contract, because it just you now associate them with the character rather than associating them as person A playing this character.
Yeah. Well, I also want to say that Jeff is great because he's a really complex character. You can tell he wants to be a good person, but he's in this situation where he's dating, I forget the girl's name, but he's dating the girl inside, but he's also gone through all these horrible things. And I feel like the revelation of what he did to his girlfriend in the car That whole thing plays out really beautifully. They
Yeah,
did that
it does.
perfectly, and
Yeah,
it's,
because they did it in a subtle way.
Yes.
It wasn't this. They didn't like blow it over the top. They even hinting at it throughout the movie. You don't really know what happened to her
Yeah.
until like the middle of the third act when he has that flashback.
Right.
And so they did a really good job with that because I find a lot of times movies will have these like twists in they'll use the twist as like the main thing in the movie, whereas this was a twist but it was just kind of to explain him, which allows
Yeah.
us to grow with him.
Well, and that's exactly what I was going to say. He's, despite having a DWI and having killed a couple of his
Two voluntary manslaughters.
Yeah, there you go. Despite that, he's a likable character because not only the way that they let you grow with him, like you said, it's at the beginning they show him trying to be a genuinely good person despite his situation, and
Yeah.
therefore he is a likable character regardless of his background. And
Right.
this is such a good, the character development for Jeff is so good in this movie that it's great. I loved it so much.
I will say, speaking of despite what they did, liking them anyway, I think they wanted me to do that with his girlfriend, but once we find out why she's in there, like there was no sympathy for me whatsoever.
I completely agree. I think what they had, the thing that she did to be in prison was too high of a bar for me to get over. It's like there's too much wrong with it that the whole rest of the movie, and it also may play into why the ending is so weak, because by the time you do realize, by the time she confesses what she did, the rest of the movie still has to play out where they get out and you feel like, yay, they got out. But what is in my mind the whole time is what she did, regardless of whether her story fell on sympathetic ears to get out of prison or not. It still affects your judgment of the character when they have set her up the whole time to be this really interesting love interest that they can and I do think that they can sort of bond over what they've done, but her thing in my eyes is so much worse than what he did that it's counterproductive to what the story they're trying to tell, I think.
Well, that's why when like there's the part where Jeff says, despite what you've done or what you've done in the past, it doesn't matter. I'm sitting there going, that matters, dude. That matters so much,
especially to someone you see yourself having kids with and marrying and stuff.
Exactly. And so it's like that one matters. That one totally matters. And this maybe you don't sweep this one under the rug.
But it's interesting that we both like Jeff and we don't like her. Because he did a horrible thing too, but at the same time, it's like I can't quite put my finger on it. Is it because it was a 3-year-old or whatever it was? Is that what it is?
I think it's
because it's this moral thing I can't figure out. And
yeah, that's a really good point, actually. That's a really good point, because he also murdered or killed people,
more people than her.
as a result of irresponsible actions.
Right.
I think it just says a lot about human nature that when or maybe it comes down to our nihilistic cynicism. Maybe it could be that, where it's like, okay, but you did it to a baby. It's different. Adults suck. Adult people suck, but a baby, it's a baby.
Well, I also, with all that being said, Steve has a really interesting story here too. The whole thing with his dad and the way they tie that into the ending of why he's doing everything that he does is really interesting. I feel like he wants to control everyone around the world into not doing horrible things anymore. And so he does horrible things in order to obtain that goal while justifying it. And that to me is really interesting, is how he's doing those mental gymnastics.
Well, and that whole scene where he confesses that about his dad is really, really powerful, and
Yeah.
again, really well acted because they're laughing uncontrollably because they're high on Laugh-A-Dil,
Yeah.
which I God,
Yeah. The
the
names
names
of
for
the
these drugs,
Yeah.
the names of the drugs, those I went there and went,
Yeah.
no,
Especially
no.
the last one,
But
OBDX.
yeah, yeah,
Was
exactly.
the worst. I
And
actually
so,
laughed at that.
and so, but regardless of that, that scene where they're laughing, but they're laughing in pain, and you still feel like the gravity of what he's saying.
Yeah.
Again, just goes to Chris Hemsworth and the dude that plays Jeff, who's I feel terrible that we can't remember his name, but those two, like
Miles
that
Teller.
scene, Miles Teller. That scene, they just sell it so well. And that's the thing. Everybody, even down to like the side characters, really sell everything. Like Rogan is a great example. Rogan is this like terrifying convict, but there's even moments in him where he's like you can see a little bit of fear at not knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
And you can see some humanity in him. It's just, dude, the character development in all the characters we end up seeing on screen is just so well done.
Yeah, including the guy that eats who grunts through the whole thing, and then at the end he's like, "Oh, hey, thanks." Like that is a really powerful moment too, because like the whole
Yeah,
time
I
all you've ever
laughed out
seen him
loud.
do is grunt and stuff.
Right, and vomit.
Yeah, and I also want to point out that Chris Hemsworth is selling this with a American accent. We haven't touched on that at
Yeah.
all. He
That's
does
true,
a
yeah,
fake
he's Australian,
American
isn't
accent
he?
in this. He's Australian, yeah, and so that makes it even more impressive that he was able to pull off some of the stuff he did in this movie
'Cause
with that.
yeah, like you said, he sells it really, really well.
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll get two versions where like the British or whatever foreign accent is coming through, or you'll get that almost like when black comedians make fun of white people and they like over enunciate everything.
Yeah.
That you kind of get that
Yeah.
in a lot of actors that are foreign trying to do American accents. But dude, he sells it so well. I was not having a lot of experience with Chris Hemsworth. I was really impressed by his performance in this.
Yeah, me too. The only other character-driven thing I want to point out, her name is Lizzie, the girlfriend.
That's right.
Lizzie's monologue is the exact opposite of how I feel about Jeff's monologue, because Jeff's great in this. What was his name? Miles Teller is great in this,
Yep.
except his short monologue toward the end when he's got Steve on the ground and like controlling the drugs in his back and stuff. Lizzie, who Journey Smollett, Journey Smollett, her acting in this is phenomenal. I might not like her character very much, but her acting in this is like genuinely beautiful, because her monologue when she is telling the fact that we have such a reaction to her character is a testament to her acting as well, because
Definitely.
it's she sells it like for sure. And the fact that I don't really that's in my mind the rest of the movie after she has this monologue, that's completely separate from her acting, because the fact that she was able to sell that is super stupid impressive.
And even the other what was that lady's name? Shitfingers. Yeah. I think that's the only name we ever, or is it? I think her real name's like Sarah.
Sarah.
That's right, but everybody calls her Shitfingers. And then we get that scene at the end where she's just smearing shit along the wall whenever they're running away. Oh my god, dude, it was just there. And that's the thing, this movie does have funny little moments in it, but it never leans too far into that. It really, really knows its place, and it toes the lines that it toes the lines that it's on really, really well.
I mean, I agree up until the ending. I don't know if I can put my finger on what exactly it is, other than it just, the whole tone of the movie shifts whenever they're trying to like get back at Steve or whatever. And for me, it just never works. And I don't know why. Do you agree with that or no? Because I feel like the tone of the whole thing is very serious and all of that, and then it goes over the top with everything, and I don't know.
My issue isn't so much. My issue with the ending, like I said before, is that it's not believable. I don't believe for a second that a man the size of Jeff is going to beat the ever loving out of somebody the size of Chris Hemsworth.
Right.
Like at one point, like Chris Hemsworth clocks Miles Teller and he falls under the stairs. If a man the size of Chris Hemsworth makes contact like that, dude, you're not getting up. But again, it's nitpicky because it's like, well, it's a movie. It's not, and fight scenes in movies are never realistic anyways.
Right.
But just the whole that aspect of it really stood out to me. And then I also had an issue with the fact that why would you give him control of the drugs and have access to your profile? Like, that part of it really stood out to me too. It's
where you can just swipe over to the next person and stuff.
Yeah, why would you do that? And so that's what really stood out to me about the ending, but I don't feel.
Well, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Sorry to cut you off. Just real quick.
No, go ahead.
I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. The proximity alert. When the police are on the way, the camera starts going, wah, 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 and it does this zoom in onto the police, which are moving toward them. It's very, like, super villain-esque. And, like, like he's built this...
James Bond?
Yes. And that's the kind of thing that really bothered me and what I mean by the tone shifts of it. Because everything is...
Well...
Everything is set in this reality that is semi-believable up until the ending.
I would say something like that. Like if you had a multi-billion-dollar research facility, you're gonna have proximity security.
I'm not saying you wouldn't. I'm saying the way that they show it is comical and almost cartoon-esque.
I did not get that.
Okay,
like that did not stand out to me. But now that you're saying it like that, I can see how it would.
It literally made me laugh, and it kept making me laugh while the entire beginning of it is really serious and stuff. Like as much as I did laugh at the guy that's grunting and he goes, "Oh, thanks," and then he stands there while everybody runs by. That's a completely different tone shift from the entire rest of the movie. Like, there's not a whole lot of comedy going on in this at the beginning, and then it just kind of the ending is too over the top comedy for me with stuff like that. And then the ending where, again, spoiler alert here, we're going to get into the very ending here. The ending when Steve drives his plane into the side of the mountain, that hits hard. And it's really emotional, and I think it's the perfect way for the movie to end, really. It's just everything in the third act leading up into that just bothered me a little bit, because it was a little too comical compared to the rest of the seriousness of the movie.
The biggest issue I had with the ending is the narration at the very, very, very end.
It's so cheesy.
Because it's not, we get no narration through the entire movie, and this is the glaring example of what makes me think they didn't know how to end this, or they weren't confident in the way they were ending it, because them driving off into the sunset, total classic movie ending. Could have left it there.
And then his monologue starts.
But we get this weird narrative monologue that I'm sitting there going like the whole time I'm going, okay, at least cut to him in the boat saying this to her so it's still in the scope of what we've been getting. But no, it's just this narration at the end. And anybody that's watched any of my solo reviews on here or on Book of Brett knows that one of my biggest dislikes in film is narration. I don't like narration unless it's like Happy Feet or March of the Penguins, like, because A, it's Morgan Freeman, we can listen to him all day, and B, it's the only way to really explain a story. But otherwise, narration, it can be this like really lazy narrative device to drive the point home to an audience that might not understand and might not get the cues. And this just kind of felt like they had one last thing to say and they didn't know how to get it in there other than this.
Man,
and I get what they were going for. They were going for the whole like I the way it's said, I almost feel like it might be an homage to the short story because it reads very much like a passage in a story.
Right.
But it's this weird thing, and I get what they were going for. They're going for the whole like nothing's gonna fix this, you have to fix it yourself, which I can get and I can respect and I can get what they're going for, but it just didn't work.
Well, it just feels like an 80s action movie throwback
Yeah.
moment. Like you're saying, they had one last thing to say. I like that a lot. They had one last thing to say and they didn't know how to get it in there in the third act before that. And so he just speaks directly to the audience, which is something he hasn't done the entire rest of the movie. Like maybe
Not for 5
maybe
seconds.
at the beginning, if he had been like, "I can't believe the way I got here," or something like that, the
No,
whole
that would've
story
been
plays
actually
out.
worse.
And that, do you think so?
That would have been worse.
I mean, I don't have. Go ahead.
Start out with like just like a Dolph Lundgren-esque monologue of just
Right.
like, I don't know how I got here.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
been 5 years. It's been 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, the only other thing I did want to touch on is the score is fantastic. They use a lot of really ambient drone notes and stuff like that, and it works. But what it does do is adds to the seriousness of the whole first two acts, and then the third act goes off the rails and sort of comedy-esque for me. And so it's weird, but the whole score is really, really good despite the weird tone shift.
Right.
Okay. Anything else you want to say? You want to give me your final thoughts here and a rating?
I thought it was, I said at the beginning, that I felt like I was just kind of coasting through it. And the more we've talked about it, the more I feel like this movie actually had an impact on me because I remember specifics from it. I remember how I felt at certain scenes. So I'm actually going to retract that statement because I feel like this movie, it almost gets into your subconscious a little bit. And I think that we do have we have basically a sci-fi psychological thriller here. We have sci-fi aspects without it being cheesy, but it's very psychological in the sense of how the drugs are affecting them after they wear off even, which is part of the study. And so, but I did enjoy this. Even after watching it, I still really enjoyed it. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10.
Okay. For me, I kind of feel like the tone shift holds this movie back a little bit more than it should. I think if they had taken the last act and kind of refined it a little bit to make it a little more serious and a little more believable, especially, and the fact that neither one of us really like Lizzie's reasoning for being imprisoned, and it sort of stays with us. All of these things hold it back from what it could be. I think if you change the ending a little bit more, this would be much stronger. You get rid of
Lizzie.
You get rid of maybe at the end when she takes the belt around her neck, like maybe we let her go there. And she and we kind of feel like okay, she sort of has I don't know, gone through something there.
Maybe she gets trapped in a in like a sunroom.
What?
Because her kid died in a car.
Oh, you mean she dies the exact
Yes.
same way? Okay,
Yes.
I see what you're saying. No, that would have been too on the nose.
That would have been too on the
That would
nose.
have been way too on the nose. Yeah, I do think she doesn't. It kind of feels like she doesn't ever have to. I mean, I guess she was in prison for many years.
Yeah.
So she has sort of, I don't know, atoned for what she did or whatever in the eyes of the law. But it still feels. It still feels like
No,
it
it
feels
sure didn't.
incomplete.
Right.
And for all of those reasons, I think this is not nearly as good as it could be. I'm gonna rate this a 6 out of 10. I liked it, and it is definitely above average. I think the way that they used the colors inside of the place versus the almost bright psychedelic stuff they do when they're trying to show you what everybody's going through. All of that stuff is really cool, but none of it adds up to be as great as it could be. So that's going to be a 6 out of 10 for me.
Cool. Yeah, and as we said, it is streaming on Netflix right now.
Yep.
It is number 1 trending or streaming in movies, I think. or it was the last time I checked. So yeah, definitely worth checking out, regardless
sure.
of like the ratings that we gave it. It's definitely worth a watch for
It's
sure.
definitely stayed with me. Like you said, I remember specifics about this movie, whereas like most newer movies don't necessarily stick with me like that.
This is one of the few. This is one of the few Netflix originals that's come out where I'm like, I wish Netflix would put their movies out in physical format.
Yeah. So, okay, if you guys like this, make sure you hit the like button. If you really liked it, make sure you hit the subscribe button because we got a lot more content like this on this channel and coming in the future. What did you think about this movie? Let us know down in the comments because I'd be really interested to see what other people thought about this. Brett and I tend to have similar sensibilities when it comes to this kind of stuff, so I kind of figured the two of us were kind of gonna kind of be into this. But it would be interesting to hear from somebody that really didn't like it and their reasoning. So if you didn't like this, or even if you did, let us know down in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys next time from the deep. Bye-bye.
Ta-ta.